So I wanted to talk about Arizona has been in the news for coronavirus because, as you may know, we opened up not so long ago. How long ago did Arizona open up, Eric? Was it 3 weeks ago?
That sounds right. I don't have the statistic right in front of me, unfortunately.
Okay,
So I don't
so
know when that happened.
yeah, it seemed like it was about 3 weeks ago that Arizona opened up, and they opened up restaurants, they opened up bars, they opened up gyms, they opened up everything, and things were kind of going great. But if you look at the deaths, about 2 weeks ago, and that's right here, we jumped from 21 deaths per day to 32 deaths per day, which is about a 50% increase almost overnight. And here we've been trending down for let's see, over a month, about 6 weeks prior to that, and then there's a quick jump, and then suddenly we're on an upward trajectory, and and then we shut down again. And what's really interesting is that when we shut down, there was an immediate. Now maybe it's backfill, maybe these but actually I don't think that would even affect it. We've just seen another drop um, in the deaths, and it's a noticeable. It looks like a real momentum shift. But it couldn't. But you see the problem is that it couldn't react that fast. Deaths are not going to drop off a day or two after the lockdown goes into effect, and yet that's kind of what this chart implies. So I think it's interesting. Maybe what we saw was a short spike, but ultimately it wasn't sustainable. There weren't that many people who are going to be infected. And a lot of the people who have died from it, as we know, are elderly. A lot of the people who are getting it now, a lot of the new cases, are younger people. And so, maybe what this tells us is that we really have passed the peak here in Arizona. It's hard for me to really wrap my head around this data because there are all kinds of oddities. We have sort of a lag in how we're getting the death data. So often, but yeah, yeah, I'm just not sure what to make of this. It seems like this breaks all existing political narratives as far as I can tell. This doesn't make anybody genius. What do you think,
Well, the funny thing is,
Eric? Are you there?
yeah, I'm here. Like, you able to hear me? Okay. I think we were having a little bit of a lag there with the stream. Um, are you able to hear me, Pete?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay. We were having a little bit of a technical lag there, but I think there's always that funny saying, which it sounds great. Say numbers don't lie. Well, sometimes they do. Because numbers are nothing more than another data point, and sometimes the data is incorrect, and sometimes it's not tabulated correctly. And that is one of the problems that we have when we talk about corona and saying numbers don't lie or look at the numbers. Well, how are you tabulating this? For instance, is we this has been in the news quite a bit. How much of an effect does the increased testing have on these numbers? How much does other factors like that? Also, in terms of deaths, one of the things that they'll talk about is sometimes it looks like you're having a downward trend in deaths, but you're really not because of the lag, because there's a lag time between obviously incubation, infection, and actually dying
Mhm.
from this thing. So all these numbers sometimes don't mean exactly what we think they mean. And remember, it's not set. Like you talk about the incubation period of COVID. Some people will get sick within 2 days of exposure, and they'll test positive after 2 days after exposure. Some people don't show any symptoms for 2 weeks, as long as 2 weeks. So that has a huge effect on statistics because you could have theoretically this whole group of people that have not been tested, that have been exposed, that are going to die even from this infection or get seriously ill. Well, they're not showing up on this graph at all right now. So that's kind of one of the problems with COVID is, especially when you look at it from day to day and even from week to week sometimes, is those little gaps in the data, they're hard to account for. Pete, I think your mic is muted again.
Yes, it is. Yeah, so to just sort of piggyback on that, if you look at the number of tests here, or the number of daily new cases, clearly this is affected by the number of tests because we're seeing a huge spike in the number of daily new cases, but we're not seeing a large spike, even if you account for lag in the number of deaths. And so what this shows you is that the 7-day rolling average of daily new cases is largely tainted. Maybe it seems that we might have peaked here at the in the past couple days, although it's a little premature to say that to say that definitively. In fact, it's premature to. What we do know is that there's been no attempt. We don't know the infection rate. We don't seem to know anything. It's just been an ongoing problem that many months into this crisis, our leaders at every level have failed to provide meaningful data, provide meaningful answers as to how deadly this is, how infectious it is. I we locked down. We talked about how we had these emergency orders that the governors passed out because the legislature didn't have time to react. Well, you know, it also applies to citizens. We have no idea how to react because we went along with the lockdown. We did everything that was asked of us as a country, but then the people who were in charge, who are supposed to sort of get a handle on the scope of this problem, have spent months doing nothing. Apparently, they've spent months just not being able to get any kind of visibility on the scope or the severity of this problem, and it's just mind blowing.
Well, one of the things
Just mind blowing.
that I find, when you talk about those kinds of issues, one of the things that I think is really upsetting and disturbing is when you talk about countries like, say, South Korea that have done an excellent job managing COVID. um, they always identify clusters. In other words, when they see any kind of a spike, they'll be able to tell you this is why. They'll actually say it's because of this nightclub. It's because of this church assembly. It's because of this concert. There was early in the epidemic, there was a concert I remember they had in South Korea, and they were attributing the COVID tests to that. The reason is because they have excellent contact tracing. So they're able to say this is where the cluster is. Contrast that with, say, Arizona, where, for instance, Governor Ducey slammed multiple clubs and nightclubs and things like that and said they were bad actors and they were being irresponsible. But he didn't give us any data to back up that claim. He didn't say, yes, we're seeing a cluster from these nightclubs from Old Town or whatever. I never saw any data that indicated that they were showing anything like that. Now, part of that, of course, I'm sure gets into lawsuits and HIPAA and things like that, but it is a key part of the equation here. If we really are seeing a spike from a certain area, from say a concert, from a theater, Pete, you and I got into it about the 2 theaters that were open, for a little bit. Well, if we're really seeing a spike from these places, well, tell us, show us the data, say this is where it's coming from, and that's why we have to shut it down, because that's what they did in South Korea. I don't see why we can't do
Right.
that.
Yeah. Well, I think there's political resistance, and I think there's political incompetence to contact tracing. That's been my observation.
Well, it's definitely something that you just don't hear a lot about. I mean, and that's not
Right.
just Arizona. You just don't hear about that. You don't hear about clusters.
Oh yeah.
That they just. I think I saw one article where they were attributing some, and I believe it was in the South or somewhere they're attributing an outbreak to a church, and that's the only time you hear about it. By the way, either at least if that for me, the only time I've ever heard anything is, oh well, it's a church's fault, but you don't hear anything about what's going on with these protesters. And of course, you have to ask yourself: do they say that? I mean, when they're because they're supposed to be giving you questions, they're supposed to be doing contact tracing, so that's something that should be coming up. But how is that treated? And you wonder if is it given equal weight to the fact that somebody went to church? And you have to ask yourself: is it, or is it being politicized? Because if it's science, it doesn't matter whether you got it at a protest or you got it at a church. We just need to know where you got it. It doesn't, but that's not what's happening. I think a lot of this is being politicized.
Yeah, I agree. It's been politicized, and it just we haven't seen our alleged leaders stand up. They're more interested in grandstanding than in actually doing something to address these problems. So very very unfortunate.